We're 4% of the world's population in the United States, but produce 75% of worldwide pharmaceutical profits. And we're 49th in life expectancy. 95% of medical spending right now in the United States is after we get sick. The long-term goal of what MAHA can do is...
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I'd like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on a brilliant guest. He is the co-author of the book Good Energy and also the co-founder of TrueMed. And this is Calley Means. Welcome to the show, man.
Oh, great to be here, man.
Calley, I've done a brief intro. Lots of my listeners will be familiar with who you are, but please introduce yourself to the audience for those who don't know.
Yeah. So I'm on a mission to really try to help RFK bring the world he's talking about, which is a world of preventative health. I mean, my foundational thesis is that 95% of medical spending right now in the United States is after we get sick. We have basically incentives that profit from a sick child. That was born into me from working for the food and pharma industry early in my career. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 10 years, but deeply inspired by my sister, Dr. Calley Means, who left Stanford Med School after 12 years of training, basically realized that she was being indoctrinated. So at Stanford Med School residency, she was a surgeon, and really realized that she didn't know why people were getting sick, and everything she was doing was to profit from being sick. And she didn't even realize she was in that system. And then my mom abruptly dying of cancer, which is what a lot of us are facing. People are dying in the United States earlier than they ever have. I mean, we have the lowest or most declined life expectancy decline, most sustained life expectancy decline since 1860 right now in the United States. So these couple experiences throughout my life led my sister and I to go on the warpath. We wrote a book called Good Energy, and really, Zuby, it was through the independent media that a lot of interesting happened in the past 2 years. So we went on Tucker, Megyn Kelly, shows like that, and through those hosts, we met politicians because politicians, I think, were clamoring to put their finger on this issue. You had this issue of health being tweeted about by you for years, being talked about on Joe Rogan. Why are we getting so sick? Is COVID really a pharmaceutical deficiency, or is it really a more root cause of why we're dying at 16% of worldwide COVID deaths, but we're 4% of the world population? Is there something wrong with our immune system? That was being really talked about and fueled, and this questioning from the independent media. And as Casey and I started going on these podcasts, we met Bobby Kennedy. I got connected by another podcast host, the Trump campaign. And I think this is new language that you see Bobby Kennedy using and that Casey and I have tried to put in the ecosystem, just about how healthcare policy isn't just about, what Medicaid Part D is, or what the nuances of our health policy is. Like, Europe has terrible health policy, but they're spending 3 times less and living 10 years more. Like, the problem in America is that our incentives are that we're sick. And I think that really started resonating. So I got to know Bobby Kennedy really well. I had this strong feeling once President Trump was shot to call him and take put something on his radar that I was thinking about for a while, which is that I suggested he talk to Trump, and that was something I was praying about, envisioning for a year. I actually, in my head, saw President Trump and Bobby Kennedy as very much touching on the same stream of frustration in the American voters, and healthcare being an example of that. So was able to make that connection and have a small vantage point to that relationship growing. And it was just extraordinary. I think we were all kind of blown away how solid that relationship became and how powerful Bobby Kennedy was on the campaign trail for Trump. Have been helping him however I can, and just staying close to the process. And I think we have, a generational opportunity, really a once in a lifetime opportunity, because it's just extraordinary. 2 years ago, these issues that are being talked about now about children's health, about health incentives, about just the need to be healthier, we're just not really resonating on the political trail. Now Bobby has a real mandate. He was just, obviously recently confirmed. I think it was the biggest cabinet confirmation in modern American history. So really excited and do whatever I can to push that forward.
That's awesome. I want to get more into the policy stuff a bit later on, but I'm curious to understand how the USA has gotten to where it is, because it's strange. It's a bit of an oxymoron with the USA. I find it a confusing country in a lot of ways because it's so wealthy and so advanced and far ahead in many ways. But then when it comes to something like life expectancy, if you compare it to comparable countries such as Canada, Australia, where I'm from, the UK, countries that actually don't have as much wealth in terms of GDP or perhaps even GDP per capita, with most of those, as far as I know. However, people are living 5, 6, 7, even 8 years longer than they are in the US. And I don't think that was always the case. So, what has happened over the decades within the USA that's led to the current health situation?
Yeah, you really trace it to the mid to late 1970s. We were surpassing Europe, and then we've seen that graph. President Trump held a graph on Rogan where most people have probably seen it, where it's all the life expectancies in every developed countries like this, and then on the X it's cost per capita. So every country's like this, and then the United States is just like totally just a straight line basically. So, three times more and, 10 years less than Japan and Switzerland, 7 years less than Italians. And I always say there's something clearly wrong there because I love Italians, but we're not lazier than Italians. They're like we're not worse people than Italians. You think to the Japanese, that probably makes sense. But they've got their shit together. But we're not lazier than Italians. So there's something wrong there. So what happened? And this is what Casey and I are really trying to unpack. One stat that really, I think, underlines it is we're 4% of the world's population in the United States, but produce 75% of worldwide pharmaceutical profits. And we're 49th in life expectancy. So this is what Casey kind of saw at Stanford Med School. 80% of her entire course load was in pharmacology and not one course in nutrition. So 90% of doctors today in the United States don't take one nutrition class. They take none. So starting at med school, which we traced Stanford, Harvard Med School down the list, 50% of their funding touches pharma. They're now hyperventilating that NIH grants might be changed. The NIH grants, which Stanford itself gets $1 billion of a year, almost all go to pharmaceutical R&D that the professors and the school then take royalties off that research. That funding isn't going to, discovering why we're getting Alzheimer's. Everything's predicated on discovering a Band-Aid for Alzheimer's, discovering a new pill for depression, not why we're getting depression. A new pill for to manage heart disease, not to cure heart disease. So through, I would say, a perversion of the free market, you've had the pharmaceutical, insurance, and hospital industries spend 5 times more together, the health industry, on lobbying than any other industry in the country. There's 4 to 5 lobbyists for every single member of Congress and senator. They're the biggest funder of politicians. They're the biggest funder of the media, which dictates our perception and the realms of debate. The media is saying, they're not asking why there's a obesity crisis among kids, but they're saying you're a war criminal for questioning the 72-shot vaccine schedule. Right. So that there's a real choice of what they focus on. There's not alarm bells being rung about 38% of teens having prediabetes. Like that to me is like a much bigger story than measles coming back. Measles is a problem. But you look at the front page of the newspaper, if one kid gets measles, it's absolutely like a national crisis. 300 people in the United States per year, 300 people died of measles before the invention of the vaccine. So we have no perspective of the fact that 200 million plus Americans are battling chronic conditions right now. So Zuby, that's kind of our overall thesis, is that there's true corporate capture of our system to where everything is predicated on people getting sick and managing it. Again, 95% of medical costs are filling the hospital beds. There's no incentive to empty the hospital beds. It's prescribing pills. We have 4.6 billion prescriptions a year. We're the most medicated country in the world. Even insurance companies, they rig the system where you think insurance companies want prices to go down, but in the United States, they actually want prices to go up. They want people to get sicker because they can only make a 15% profit margin, which when that passed during Obamacare, that sounded good. Okay, we're going to cap their profits, but they were allowed to raise premiums. So when you can only get 15% profit margin, and you're allowed to raise premiums to get that 15%, what's your incentive? Your incentive is for costs to grow. And everyone in the I've gotten literal like major insurance company CEOs reach out and they're like, this is a massive problem. Like I am lobbying, we are spending tens of millions of dollars lobbying for costs to go up. Like it's a massive problem. So every single lever of the system is like that. And we can get to what Bobby's solutions are, but I think that's the problem.
If you're a fan of dystopian fiction and sci fi thrillers, then you should check out Lucid, a new novel by writer Michael S. Milano. Lucid is a 21st century blend of 1984 and Brave New World, set during a devastating pandemic. The year is 2084, and the Pansophical Corporation protects what's left of humanity from the deadly Timbaku virus and a terrorist organization known as Praxis. After losing his wife to the pandemic and being assaulted by public safety for violating curfew, citizen Anthony Sartori begins to have bizarre flashbacks. In a culture dominated by suspicion, asking the wrong questions could put him in the crosshairs, but Anthony is determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Lucid is an exciting and timely read that cautions against collectivism, technological surveillance, and sacrificing freedom for the illusion of safety. If that's up your alley, go to lucidthebook.com and grab yourself a copy today. That's LUCID, thebook.com to get yourself a copy. Free to be safe, safe to be free. lucidthebook.com. We're both entrepreneurs, so we're generally fans of the free market. But is this a potential danger of free market capitalism when you're just discussing what's going on here with the profit incentives? Or is it more the fact that there is the lobbying going on? And I don't really understand the whole lobbying situation within politics in the USA. It's a very strange sort of foreign concept to me because it doesn't seem like something that should be allowed, but it clearly is. And there's more people lobbying than there are the people that there are lobbying, as you said. So what is going on there? Is that to use the term excessive capitalism, it makes me sound like a communist or something, but is it perhaps a perverse incentive that comes from that system, or is there something else that's perverting it?
I'm so excited you asked this because this is the key thing and opportunity that Bobby and Trump have to articulate. So a lot of people look at this disaster we have, and everyone agrees we have a disaster for health in the United States. And people on the left say, okay, it's capitalism run amok. We need Medicare for all. We need basically socialized medicine. That's the completely incorrect analysis of the situation. What we have is just pure corruption right now. We have an absolute corruption of the system. So let's just go through the medical departments. The department Bobby Kennedy's taking over, HHS, which is actually the largest government agency in the world. It's the largest agency, highest budget, most employed agency in the United States, much bigger than the Defense Department. And let's look at the rigged incentives. So you start with the NIH. This is a massive pool of money, $50 billion a year. And as I said, 85% of that money, the government money, which everyone would assume is going to foundational research and exploring why we're getting sick and exploring actionable ideas to prevent and reverse disease. 85% of NIH funding goes to pharmaceutical research. So there's no other industry in the world that has this. They've got a government slush fund of a lot of money that's going to basically profit from the fact that we're getting sick. That's a really important situation. So that really skews all research. The NIH grant making process drives everything else. It drives the incentives. I talked to a dean of a leading med school off the record, and he said that's what drives everything, and that has driven the sick care system. Then we get to the FDA. So the FDA is in charge of basically the arbiter of what are the correct treatments and cures. And you talk a lot about the FDA process, and this is talked about $3 billion to get a therapeutic through. So if you have a new drug or you have a new blood test or preventative screening, as an entrepreneur, you can't get through the FDA process. You can't get through a process where you can get approved as a medical treatment without $3 billion. That's total corruption where big pharma has rigged that. So the only companies that can get through are these incremental, new drugs that have to have a really large market. So it's a market like a chronic disease like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and then it's not profitable to cure those conditions. It manages them. So when you look at pharma, the incentives really play out where there haven't been really, I would argue, many breakthrough cures. If you think about a medical miracle, you're probably thinking about something decades ago. The pharmaceutical industry is, people would say Ozempic, but that's managing obesity. It's not curing it. There's, always just, incremental SSRIs, incremental statins, incremental, management techniques. Cancer has been a disgrace, right? We spend $300 billion on cancer management a year. Cancer rates are going up. right? When you read the book Emperor of All Maladies about the history of cancer, we still do chemotherapy, which was created 100 years ago. We haven't advanced that much. It really just very limited management techniques. So you have the FDA process that's really incentivizing status quo, and then this is the key one, Zuby, is this boring agency CMS that Dr. Oz is taking over. I haven't
What does that stand for?
Center for Medicare. It's Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Mm.
So it's Medicaid. I, I've never thought about that department up until a year or two ago. No American knows about that department. CMS. Dr. Oz at CMS is taking over a significantly higher budget than all defense and intelligence, that one subsect of HHS. That is the department that pays out Medicare and Medicaid, which is 50% of all healthcare spending in the United States, or government programs. And the codes and logic that CMS creates actually inform not only all private insurance in the US, but has a lot of impact around the world. And the Medicare Medicaid department, and this is really important for people to understand, they outsource their medical codes to a group called the CMS department outsources medical codes to a group called the American Medical Association, which is a pharmaceutical lobbying group. And I just want to really, this is something we all need to unpack in America, and everyone needs to understand. The medical codes in the United States are made by a pharma lobbying group. That
Sorry,
pharma lobby,
Calley. When
yeah,
when you say medical codes, what does that mean? I'm not clear about that term.
great question. So every single doctor's appointment in the United States, the doctor isn't making a decision. They're typing into a computer and they're getting a logic of what they should do. And that logic that underlies all insurance reimbursement, which then obviously dictates what doctors do, is driven by a pharma lobbying group. So, as an example, a couple of years ago, I got my blood test and the doctor said, totally fine, you're great. And then I showed it to my sister, Casey, and she said, this is blaring metabolic dysfunction. You've got serious problems. You're actually going to absolutely die earlier and have a host of metabolic conditions. And this is blaring warning signs. Your HDL and your triglycerides and the ratio here is really problematic. So I go back to the doctor who said I was fine. And I asked if that was true. And she said, yeah, 100%. I'm like, why didn't you say anything? She's like, well, because we all get the blood test in the United States. And she said, you're not treatable yet. So my cholesterol has to
Mm.
get to a certain point where she prescribes a statin, and that's all based on an algorithm. So that's a great example, right? That there could be logic where the doctor is actually incentivized to talk to me and incentivize, like they do in Europe, if you have underlying metabolic dysfunction, to eat better food, to exercise more. The medical systems, there could be codes like there is in Europe to actually incentivize exercise, to get gym memberships. I'll give you another example. There's an infertility crisis in the United States. Elon's talking a lot about this. We have we really are losing the ability to reproduce in the United States. Male sperm counts down 50%, and PCOS. This is the leading cause of female infertility. It's skyrocketed in the past 20 years. And the medical codes, when a woman has PCOS, which is now they estimate about 26% of women of childbearing age, so it's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
26%?
Yeah, if you talk to any woman in the United States and ask about PCOS, this is a massive issue in the United States. PCOS, it's a scourge of the country.
Mm.
So what happens based on our codes is we wait for you to be diagnosed with PCOS, and then the first step is jamming the woman with hormone pills, and very quickly it gets to IVF. Now, we should have IVF, and it's really been a miracle for many women. But those are pretty invasive procedures. A bunch of hormone pills, and that's every woman who has PCOS. They'll be recommended those within 15 minutes, and then a very quick path to IVF, which is an invasive, gruesome procedure that it has a lot of potential complications. In Europe, they prescribe a keto diet for PCOS. Why? PCOS is insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, which we talk about in our book, is really an underpinning of a lot of conditions. It's the underpinning of diabetes, heart disease, even Alzheimer's, which is now called type 3 diabetes. So PCOS is actually a warning sign for the woman that her metabolic health, that her cells aren't functioning correctly because of food and environmental factors. The most efficacious treatment for that, and there's studies on this, 12 weeks of limiting your carbs can dramatically improve the underlying insulin resistance, thus improve your PCOS conditions and increase fertility. That's literally what the medical codes and medical system in Europe recommends. There's a stairs that go up, and they have this in Scandinavian countries and France. It's food interventions, and then if those don't work, some pills, and then IVF. But that makes a lot of sense. The reason those codes don't recommend a diet is because if a woman starts eating a keto diet, which doesn't cost the system much, and cures herself, I mean, think about that from an economic perspective. Not only has she foregone, very expensive interventions that will make the system a lot of money, like IVF, she's actually attacked the root cause of what will cause other issues down the road. I always go to my mom who abruptly died of pancreatic cancer, and the doctor at Stanford said this is a tough break. It wasn't a tough break. Pancreatic cancer has grown like 6x per capita in the past 50 years in the United States. It's a highly tied to her metabolic dysfunction. And in the book, we trace really to my birth, where she had gestational diabetes, we think. And I was 12 pounds, which is actually a sign that the mother has metabolic dysfunction. And then she has
You
high
mean
cholesterol.
birth weight?
Yeah. So
Oh,
that
wow. Oh,
so
that's
she
huge.
was getting high fives at the doctors for me being 12 pounds, but that's actually a warning sign. That's a
Oh,
warning
gosh.
sign. And then, she had trouble losing weight, and then she got on the statin, and the doctor's like, "Oh, high cholesterol, that's normal." Then she had high blood sugar and got on the metformin. Oh, 50% of people your age are pre-diabetic. So what we do is we get people on these interventions, don't based on our logic of our medical system, don't give and engender curiosity about why they're getting sick. um, you know, Now 65% of the country has at least one chronic condition. Chronic conditions are very profitable, and the invisible hand of our medical system leads to that. Would I just say, Zuby, the PCOS example? I think most women would love to hear that information about what really the underlying factors are and take action. You literally just don't have doctors literally even knowing what I just said. I've talked to OBGYNs from Harvard, who actually didn't even learn what PCOS is. They just know how to cut someone open and do IVF.
So, what is it that changed so drastically over the couple decades? I mean, you said that the PCOS rates, you said they've gone up by how much in about 20 years?
Oh, multiple, like multiples. I think it's like 5x. It's a dramatic increase in the past couple decades.
So, let's go back to, say, 1995, or to be a bit more liberal, let's say 1990. What has changed so drastically between 1990 and 2024, 2025 that has happened?
My hypothesis is there's been just an all-out assault on what we you call metabolic health, what our underlying cellular functioning is. We could talk more about that, but you know, there's a lot of hypotheses, but I think it's a mix of a lot. So let's go back. Let's go back to 1990. So I talk a lot about how in 1990, the two largest food companies in the country were cigarette companies. So people forget this, but in 1985, Philip Morris and RJ Reynolds were two of the largest companies in the world. I think they were in the top 10 most valuable companies in the world. Selling addiction's a great business. And the Surgeon General came out in the 80s and said smoking is not great, way too late, but they said that. And Americans listened to medical experts. So smoking rates went down, but they used their massive cash balances. Um, RJ Reynolds bought Nabisco, and Philip Morris bought Kraft and US Foods. So 40 to 50% of the US food supply by 1990 was owned by cigarette companies. And they did two things. They brought their addiction specialists from cigarettes. They had the highest paid scientists in the world, and asked, how can we create food chemicals to make the food more palatable and more addictive? And then, of course, cigarette companies were some of the best lobbyists in the world. So they brought their lobbyists, and they directly lobbied in 1992 for the food pyramid. And we all know about the food pyramid. You probably heard about that.
Oh, for sure. I grew up with that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
You go.
I grew up in Saudi
Okay.
Arabia, but I was in the American school system from kindergarten to
And they
fifth
talked
grade,
about the food pyramid, right?
for sure.
I mean, that's a whole nother thing. The US actually uses their mass power to get their medical guidelines throughout the whole world. So unfortunately, the other countries are doing better, but we exported the food pyramid around the world. So if you look at the food pyramid, right, the base of the pyramid was cereals. The base of the pyramid was processed food, was carbs. And again, and this is a key point, we listen to medical experts. So the percentage of carbs in the American diet went up 20% in the next 10 years. And the food pyramid really was an ultra processed food marketing document. So, in the 80s, it was like 20, 30% ultra processed, basically things from a box of our diet. It was very low. It's dramatically increased to now 70% today of a child's diet is ultra processed food. And the reason this is not the free market, right? The reason ultra processed food is so problematic is because when you look at the box and there's all these chemicals we don't understand, it's to make the food cheap, but it's also a science experiment from really, really talented scientists to make that food ultra palatable and addictive and hijack our satiety signals. So, you talk about this, right? Like eating meat and eating whole food. It's like we can't overeat grass-fed steak and broccoli. Like your body has these like truly like evolutionarily programmed um sensors to like not overdo it. That's why no animals in the wild are chronically obese. Any animal that's left to their own devices doesn't get super fat and diabetic. But the ultra processed food by design, makes us want to eat more, hijacks our signals. So that's one dynamic that happened. There's a lot of hypotheses, right? The overprescription of pharmaceuticals is a huge problem. I think, the whole attack on Bobby for even asking a question about the fact that we have 72 vaccines, it's like that should be asked. That's a totally appropriate question. Wider than that, the fact that 40% of teens are on some kind of pharmaceutical product, that's a good question. These products really disrupt our microbiome, disrupt our cellular biology. But you go to the basics too, Zuby. You just go to sleep. We get 2 hours less sleep than we did 100 years ago. You go to being outside in the sun and exercising. Kids get less time outside in a school in the United States than a prisoner does in a maximum security center. Um, and then another pillar that not only impacts our mental health but our entire physical health is chronic stress. I mean, all these kids tied to their phones and stuff. So these things aren't necessarily bad. We should have a free market, of course, but from our, and I like my phone. I like my artificial light. I like a lot of the technology that we have. I like a lot of the food we have, and we shouldn't be banning Coke or beer or cigarettes. Like it's a free country, but the fact that our medical system isn't looking at these foundational root causes that clearly have led to this explosion, and this is where the devil's bargain comes in. The medical system isn't calling that out. In fact, they're taking money from food companies. The American Diabetes Association took money from Coke. Like there's a Coke machine in every single hospital and school in the country. There's been a really deliberate effort to like not ask why we're getting sick, because if you get to that answer, it really hurts the medical system. Chronic disease is a really good thing. So I think there's been a lot of factors in the past 30 years, and then there's been an unwillingness to ask what's happening. That's why Bobby Kennedy and President Trump, when he was sworn in, Trump signed an executive order, and the executive order was, why the hell are we getting sick? We're going to have all of government figure out why we're getting sick. That's really important.
I hear all that. I have a big question in my head, and how do you balance freedom and a free market? And as you've just said, you don't necessarily support um, banning some of these things, for example. But given that the obvious driver for the corruption is the profit incentive, how do you change the incentive without encroaching on some people's concept of freedom? Is there a way to do that?
Twofold. Don't recommend toxic crap and don't subsidize toxic crap. So a lot of people ask, well, isn't this just the same as the Mayor Bloomberg, Michelle Obama, nanny state soda taxes? Nobody's calling for soda taxes. So I'll throw this to you, and I think this is really these are great questions. I think this is really what we have to unpack, and I frankly think there's been a lot of success on the conservative side of understanding these concepts. We got to keep communicating them. A big thing that's going to be talked about in the next couple of weeks is SNAP. So SNAP, or food stamps, is a major program in the United States. Elon's talking about government efficiency. It's the fourth largest entitlement program. So we've got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the health programs, and then SNAP. It's $150 billion a year that go to supplemental nutrition assistance program. So supplemental nutrition for lower income folks in the United States. 15% of the United States depends on SNAP. So is it freedom that Coke and Pepsi have lobbied tens of millions of dollars to ensure that soda is the number one item on SNAP and that 20% of food stamp dollars go to soda? To me, that's not freedom. And they're actually still arguing that, actually on the left now, who's totally bought off by food and pharma for whatever reason, that's the party of big food and pharma now, the left. There's 23 states in preparation for Bobby trying to fix SNAP and get soda off SNAP. And what the Democrats say is that's an attack on freedom. I would argue that subsidizing $20 billion a year from the US Treasury to soda companies to shove addictive diabetes water into the hands of lower income American children is not freedom. Um, I do not think soda should be banned, but it should be not be subsidized, just as we shouldn't subsidize cigarettes. And it should be transparent. I think it's about transparency. I don't think transparency is a principle that's a problem. You have right now pesticide companies in the United States aggressively lobbying for no labeling on food of what pesticides are in the food, even though these pesticides are banned in Europe. It's like, we should get the science right, figure out if there's really something problematic, particularly if it's banned in every other country. But at the very least, America should have transparency. So those are the two areas I think that Bobby's focused on. It's subsidies, and then it's the recommendations. It's the
Mm.
science. Right now, the USDA nutrition guidelines, which created the food pyramid, it's very very important action the government takes. These nutrition guidelines make really set the culture on food, and set the food standards for hospitals and military and schools. They don't take a stand on ultra processed food right now. They say it can be healthy for children. They actually recommend, our guidelines to this day recommend added sugar as a healthy part of a 2-year old's diet. Um, they attack meat. Um, so so that's where I would really push on the freedom. People should have freedom. Like parents should, I mean, I guess be able to give their kids sugar, but with the diabetes and obesity crisis among 6-year-olds, I don't think the government should be recommending added sugar for kids. I think we should have a national conversation from our scientific authorities about how we need to reverse course here.
Yeah, I think it's a very tricky one. I think it's a really tricky balance because, particularly on the conservative side of things, and particularly in the USA, I think people naturally have an aversion to government, anything that could be perceived as government overreach, overregulation, certainly outright bans, things like that, even increasing taxes on certain things. And, it's kind of fascinating. At the same time, you'll hear people say that sugar is just as bad or worse than cigarettes, for example. And at this stage in 2025, I don't think most people are opposed to heavily taxing tobacco products, for example, or banning them from directly advertising specifically to children, but even to adults in many cases. But if someone were to suggest that for, super unhealthy junk food or hyper ultra processed stuff, the worst of the worst, even though at the same time people don't want those things to be consumed too much and they can see all the fallout from it, they also don't really want to take that step, even if there are other nations around the world that have. I think it's a bit similar. It's slightly different topic, but I think it's similar with the concept of the big pharma ads in American TV and in magazines and stuff. Like as a non-American, it blows my mind every time I come across that. I'm just in the gym, and you've got all the screens, the amount of screens in gyms in America is insane, or you're just out and about, and just the amount of the big pharma ads, because those are totally illegal in most of the world, and they're there, and then they list all the crazy side effects at the end. And again, most countries have decided, I think all of them except the US and New Zealand, that, hey, that should not be allowed. Um, but in the US, it is allowed. And there's a question of, well, is banning that governmental overreach, or is that just something we should do for the, I hate the term, the greater good, because it's been used so manipulatively over the years, but in the name of actual genuine public health and transparency, and perhaps even allowing the proper market forces to work, is that something that we should permit? I think it's a very valid and important question.
You're hitting on, I think, the most important questions we need to be asking in the next couple of years, as we, my framework is we have an existential health problem in the United States. I think we're closer to societal collapse than we understand with, how our food system is just totally failing, and Americans, I think, are becoming a non-competitive, depressed, and infertile population to a much faster degree than we understand. So I think this is a huge issue. I think you're hitting on something where we should all be very concerned about. We're the government, we're here to help, and I think the slippery slope is real. So I think there is very warranted trepidation of government overreach. A framework I talk about a lot is, fixing corruption is a free market imperative. It's not an attack on the free market. So I think you need to be very targeted and very clear where you're doing this. But, I always go, let's just go to two examples we talked about. It is obviously not, to me, the free market that we subsidize soda for lower income people. And I think conservatives, frankly, have gotten more of a spine and understanding of this. I mean, there's Mike Lee, one of the most conservative senators in the country, just introduced a bill to take soda off SNAP. And to me, that's an anti-corruption bill. So I think you need to go case by case. When you get to, we're being poisoned by food, then the medical incentives, and should our medical logic that drives $4.5 trillion a year in spend in the United States, the biggest part of the US economy, should that be outsourced to a group that is 95% funded by pharma, that just by definition has a incentive for Americans to get sick and then manage those conditions? Is that government overreach actually to correct that obvious corruption and have a national conversation about how we can have a medical standard of care that prioritizes disease reversal and prevention? Um, so you got to go through these one by one, but I would really frame this as attacking corruption. Then you get to transparency, and this is not never going to be a fully clear answer. Um, but what's interesting about pharma ads is actually a lot of other countries don't ban them. They actually require more disclosure. So there is clear Supreme Court precedent in the United States that there's obviously free speech, but consumers need to be informed. There's a precedence for that. And actually, it wasn't that long ago. In 1997, um, pharma ads had to disclose more about the risks of their product. And through intense lobbying, they shortened the disclosure requirements on the ads. So you actually had a law in the books before 1997 where you effectively didn't have pharma TV ads because there was a standard of disclosure. When you look at a drug, there's the massive package insert, and they only read a small part of that. So I do think there's a very reasonable question in the United States. If we agree that transparency is important, and patients and consumers should make an informed decision, are patients being informed correctly by pharma ads in the United States when, since 1997, we have dramatically become the most medicated country in the world and the sickest country in the developed world? And I think there's a very good argument and a discussion I think we will be having is, should we relook at what the laws were before 1997? Should we assess whether that 1997 change led to better patient outcomes and better transparency? I think the answer is clearly not. And I think there's a clear constitutional precedent and, frankly, expectation of the American people that they're not misled by drug dealers to be drugging their kids. That's led to disastrous outcomes, and we potentially need some additional disclosures. Um, Obviously, the pharma ads, in addition to leading to our over medication in this country, as Tucker has talked about, really do influence the news itself and the decisions making news stations do. I think looking at pharma ads is a great idea because the loser in that is the mainstream media that is basically living off of this corrupt bargain with the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. Of all the issues that we have discussed, and this might be difficult for you because there are so many major health issues facing the American population right now. Which of them concerns you the most?
Yeah, the foundation of Casey and my message is that it's all connected. I think the real thesis of our book, and really I think the long term goal of what Maha can do, is redefine medicine from a siloed system that we have in the United States to an interconnected view. 90% of deaths in the United States and 90% of healthcare costs are tied to chronic disease. Okay. Now, right now, if you're like my mom, if you're diabetic, if you have high cholesterol and heart issues, if you're depressed, if you have kidney issues, and if you have, sinus infections, you're going to five different doctors and you're getting five different drugs and treatment plans completely uncoordinated. So we're basically masking the symptoms. All of those conditions I just mentioned, almost any condition that's plaguing American life is interconnected. The root of that tree is our food, is our sedentary lifestyle, is our sleep, is our, toxins in the environment and our drugs. So what I would say is that the core issue, the most important issue in the country, obviously, is the metabolic health crisis, is the chronic disease crisis. And it's so convenient and profitable to wait for someone to get symptoms and then drug those. And it's extraordinary, right? The American Diabetes Association literally said until 2018, they were ashamed to change this. Until 2018, the American Diabetes Association said if you take your diabetes drugs, you don't have to modulate your diet at all. You can eat as much sugar as you want. But obviously, if you take the diabetes drug and still eat sugar, or you take the Ozempic and still eat crappy food, or take the statin. I mean, everyone that takes a statin, until very recently, probably still in many cases today, it's like, oh, I remember my uncle when I was younger. Oh, I got my statin. I can eat my burger now. I can eat. It's just like,
Oh
but
man.
that's literally what the medical system is saying. So that's what's happened where we see, okay, I did something. I got the statin. Now I'm good. But you're still wrecking your metabolic health. And that's why comorbidities have gone up. That's why the average person that has diabetes has three other comorbidities because you're not addressing the root cause. So I think the most important thing in America, the major national conversation that we need to have, it sounds kind of crunchy and hippie, but like, doctors, when a kid has high cholesterol, which is like skyrocketing now, or has obesity, we need to get to the root cause for that kid. We need to incentivize better food, better behavior. Um, that's appropriate. That's not an anti-freedom initiative, Zuby. To me, the $4.5 trillion of our medical system should be going and incentivizing the most efficacious treatments to prevent and reverse disease. To me, the fact that we're shoving statins and metformin and Ozempic into that kid, that's corruption right there. That's not clinically accurate. So that's I think the big goal long term is actually a reimagining of our standard of care to where there's not. I think I mentioned, in the book, the first chapter is Casey choosing at the end of medical school between 42 medical specialties. This is a lie how we segment medicine and segment the body. Um, we need to have a much more interconnected view of our metabolic health, which will solve the root of the problem.
Well, I'm certainly happy that these conversations are finally starting to go mainstream. I mean, as someone who's been a health and fitness advocate for over 2 decades at this point, it's always sort of amazed me, not in a positive way, the fact that these conversations are just not really part of the public conversation when it comes to the state and government entities. I mean, if I look at a country like the USA or even the UK, because the UK is behind, but it's not that far behind the USA. The UK is not a healthy population either. It's just that the US is so bad. But all of the West pretty much is trending in this direction, as well as many, many countries outside of the West. I mean, some of the fattest nations on earth are actually more in the East and Pacific Islands and places like that. And it sort of just blows my mind that of all the issues that are discussed, no one wants to just step in and say, hey, what about this gigantic batch of health issues? What about having the majority? You literally said the majority of the population having some type of chronic illness, the majority of the population being overweight and obese, when that was not the case a few decades ago. The fertility problems, all of these things. I mean, they're so blatant and obvious, and I do wonder if the excesses of political correctness that have been faced over the past decade and people, you know, using terms like fat phobia, even, and the whole sort of healthy at any size and body positivity thing, I think that's played quite a significant role in keeping those conversations at bay because people just don't really want the smoke and they're just like, let's just pretend that that's not a thing. And instead, people just keep getting fatter and fatter and less healthy, and that has real consequences, not just for individuals, but for communities, for states, and then for the nation as a whole. I'd say it's actually a national security threat when the population is as unhealthy as it is.
Well, as Bobby and President Trump talked about in his confirmation, when he was sworn in, 77% of U.S. military age um, youth aren't eligible to join the military. They need a waiver right now. And under under President Biden, they were working to reduce the standards for the military. Um, yeah, it's a huge problem.
So, how do we fix the incentives?
I think it can be done very quickly. I think it can be done extremely quickly. I think when we look at Bobby and President Trump, my framework is unrelenting wins. I think we're really um, changing consciousness in the country. I think to your point, Zuby, I think the wokeness and the the DEI issues and all these weaponizations that the media and has done to kind of distract us is a really, really, really big deal. Actually, I think President Trump's election was the most important election by far in my lifetime. And I think this idea of like wokeness, which is kind of diminished as an issue from the left, was a really important issue. I'm not joking. An NIH grant, half of it was on DEI issues. And you had to talk about how you were addressing the trans community in basic foundational scientific research grants. I talked about how when I worked for Coke 14 years ago, we paid the NAACP to weaponize race and say it was racist to take Coke off of food stamps. The Civil Rights Foundation now, they won on gay marriage. 10 years ago, they weren't going to close up shop. They ended up taking money from pharma. Pharma's now their largest funders, and they're saying anyone's a transphobe for not wanting to do expensive procedures on kids. I really do actually think that a lot of our debate has been totally weaponized by corporate interests. So I think the left has unknowingly kind of fallen into this trap, and we've totally lost track of the plot to where we're getting extremely sick. What's the scourge of underprivileged communities? Black communities is metabolic health. It's not that the scientific grant application has 50 pages that a professor needs to fill out on DEI issues. It's that we're literally just being distracted from why we're getting sick. So that's the problem. What can we do? We have to just have and support wins from President Trump and Bobby on attacking the incentives. I think if we can have unrelenting wins like SNAP reform, like getting corruption out of the FDA, which is now 75% funded by pharma, like getting the AMA out of medical codes, which I talked about, having our medical codes actually created by a third party, not a pharmaceutical lobbying group, um, by taking on the revolving door where 11 of the past 12 FDA directors went straight to pharma. There's a long list of transparency initiatives, anti-corruption initiatives that I think will have a lot of the American people's support. And I think if we can do like Trump speed, where it's just unrelenting wins on exposing to the American people what's happening and getting people excited about cleaning up the incentives in our science, I think that creates momentum where we can't go back. My framework is that a win for Maha is that in 2028, both candidates are actually debating how to be more Maha. You had this extraordinary situation during the confirmation for Bobby Kennedy where the Democrats, were the party of arguing for soda for kids. They were the party where Elizabeth Warren was excoriating Bobby Kennedy for having the tenacity to sue these poor pharma companies because their profit margins are so slim. And how dare you? Can you please, Bobby, please promise me you will never sue the pharmaceutical industry once you get out? That's unthinkable. That's the type of energy you had from the left. My whole framework is the politics drive the policy. And you have, for whatever reason, this complete unwillingness on the left to protect kids. And if Bobby and Trump can be popular on this, if Maha can help the midterms, if this coalition can stay together, I think it's actually a positive element because you change the Overton window where I think the left will have to not be arguing, how we can poison kids more and profit pharmaceutical companies, but um, actually coming up with ideas themselves. And you'll have JD Vance and whoever's running on the left debating about how to protect kids, not how to help pharma companies. Everyone needs. It's a historical situation. These Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, just apoplectic that Bobby would have the temerity. You had a Democratic senator. How dare you attack SSRIs? That's anti-science. SSRIs are a
Crazy.
disaster. Like, it's a disaster. 25% of women are on SSRIs in the United States. Depression's not going down. So to call these questions is popular. It's vital. And I think Bobby's got to go hard. And I've got a list, right? We've got 300 popular things that Bobby can do just unrelentingly. I mean, just looking at the list, baby formula. Like, baby formula in the United States is required to have seed oils based on seed oil lobbyists. You have
Oh my
everyone in
gosh.
the United States importing illegally their baby formula, health conscious people from Europe. So, I'm just every single day, maternal health. We have the worst maternal health in the United States right now, or in the developed world, in the United States. So you can just go down the food dyes. Like why do we have these food dyes that are banned in every other country? Um, so I just think you can have unrelenting wins, continue to gain popularity for this movement, and I think if that just keeps up, we can't really go back. I frankly, Zuby, am agnostic to what's done when, because
Mhm.
it's such a big system. What I really think we're trying to do is change consciousness. I think when you listen to Joe Rogan, when you listen to podcasts, they've been talking about this for years. It's actually where Americans are really, kind of, they know something's wrong and they want to be healthy and they want their kids to be healthy. They're trying to figure this out. If that can come from the government. And the last thing I'll say is, don't sleep on this executive order that President Trump signed. Bobby's going to be leading a commission with most cabinet secretaries. So I love this, right? Because Bobby's chairing it, and it's got the housing and urban development. It's got the ag secretary. It's got the OMB. It's got people from defense. He's actually going to be chairing this whole of government approach to understand the holistic, interconnected nature of why we're getting sick, and then make suggestions. And I love that it's many different departments of government, because this isn't just a health issue. It's really an interconnected issue. So Trump is having Bobby work with throughout the government and with this amazing cabinet to make suggestions and implement solutions.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I really, really hope that a lot of this works out because I'm not an American, but I love the USA and I love many, many Americans. I love the American people as a whole. And I think it's such a huge shame that the public health is just in the toilet. I think it's an absolute disaster. I've thought that for decades. And the USA is such a leader in the world in many ways. And there's so much innovation, so much entrepreneurship, so many great things and ideas come out of the US. Um, but it's also number one in some very shameful things. And some of these things that we're talking about, I'm like, these are not things that you want to be number one at. These are things that, you know, when you're looking at the developed world, you want to be inspiring other people in a healthy direction in all ways, shapes, and forms. And ultimately, what makes a nation? It's the people. And if the people are metabolically unhealthy, another thing we haven't even really touched on is how that ties into mental well-being, right? So you hear all this talk about mental health, but as you've said, people have siloed it off in the industries. They've siloed away all of these different areas. So people think that there's people who don't even realize that there's a mental health and a physical health connection. Some people would be blown away if you even suggested, if they're saying they're having issues, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're feeling this way, feeling that way, and then you want to talk about nutrition and sleep and exercise and drinking water, and they're so programmed into the pharmacology approach that they don't even see how it's connected. They're like, why are you asking me about sleep and food, right? Just what pill should I take? Right? Or what about this chemical imbalance in my brain? And I don't know, I feel like they've sort of psyoped and gaslit millions of people into like misdiagnosing their own problems.
As you're saying that, I think it's worth noting, um, there's great room for optimism. I mean, we've got we've got an existential issue on this in the United States. I think you're right. It's like we're not at our best right now. The core foundation of society should be producing, happy, spiritually grounded, in whatever that means to you, citizens. And Bobby talked about how this is really a spiritual crisis. It's not a tactical issue if we don't have enough SSRIs, we don't have enough Ozempic, or we don't have enough drugs for people. That's literally what the left is arguing. They're arguing we need more access to drugs. We've lost touch with nature. I mean, we've lost touch with our, spirituality and how we treat kids. Our soil is being depleted. I actually think this gets into an interesting environmental discussion. I mean, our food in the United States is 70% less nutrient dense than it was 50 years ago because our soil is being so depleted. We've lost kind of respect for basic things, but the room for optimism is that, man, like what an amazing, like Bobby Kennedy, like defeating like the biggest industries in the world. We're just trying to annihilate him, and he stood in the Oval Office and is now leading our health authorities. I mean, that is amazing. Like it is an amazing grassroots victory. And then you're not having this in China, where on podcasts and the most popular, outlets in the country, we're eviscerating our system and criticizing it and waking people up. And there's now political power. I thought it was really cool. Ron Johnson reached out to my sister and I, a senator from Wisconsin, and he said, "Pick 10 people. I don't care what party they're from. Come to the Senate. I want to expose this issue." We brought Bobby Kennedy came during the campaign, and we were in this ornate room in the Senate, the Kennedy caucus room, this iconic room, and we were eviscerating the corruption in the Senate itself. And Ron Johnson was, encouraging that, and we were calling out the corruption in the government itself. It's like I'm like, wow, you don't do this in China. Like, actually, a U.S. senator is actually encouraging us to come in and eviscerate the institution itself. So there is this beautiful feedback loop, really honestly protected by free speech, which they were trying to shut down this discussion. And that's why I think this election and what Elon's doing, I mean, it really is historical. I mean, Elon and President, we're all going to be forgotten. I think Elon and President Trump are two people that will probably be remembered for a long time. This was a consequential period. I think we're in kind of one of the most important inflection points, probably three or four most important in history for Washington, Lincoln. I mean, I think we're actually, I think the anxiety right now is really around that there is so much opportunity with all the technology that's happening, all of this. There's an incredible future ahead, but there's also an ability to destroy ourselves too that's higher than ever. Um, and in order to get through these difficult issues, we need free speech. Because we've got, I mean, I think we're dealing with more complicated societal and international and technological developments than at any time in American history at a faster rate. And we have to be able to talk about it and figure these things out.
What are you concerned about in terms of the self destruction element?
Well, I think there's 3 big things, honestly, going into this election I was worried about. I think, nuclear war, I think a health collapse, and AI. I mean, I think these, are all, very powerful things that where there's great opportunity. We can have an incredible future of longevity and abundance in the United States on our health, where we can use technology to figure out how to reverse and prevent disease, use technology to figure out how to create, better food to help our farmers, but the health incentives, as we talked about, are really problematic, and I do think we're on potential verge of a societal collapse. I mean, you look at the fragility of our agriculture systems right now, and what's happening to our food, and the fact that Bill Gates owns more farmland than any other person. He's saying we need to get away from whole food to ultra processed food. I mean, there's these weird things happening, and I
Is that what he
yeah,
said? That's
yeah,
a
yeah.
quote
Bill
from
Bill
him?
Gates is heavily is saying it's archaic to think about fresh fruits and vegetables, and he's weirdly pushing this ultra. The Gates Foundation is going to developing countries in Africa and pushing a
Oh, I know
ultra
that.
processed food diet, which is really weird. They're very much on the fake meat, the cultivated meat. It goes to like basically that traditional agriculture techniques are bad for the environment. We need to be much more modern in how we do instead of getting back to basics to regenerative farming, which is carbon neutral. So there's this very weird thing tying the climate agenda to farming being bad. You'll
Mm.
I have spent a lot of time. I still can't wrap my head around it, and the fact that he thinks population is too high. I mean, which he said clearly. So you need to
I was
tackle
just
that for
about
me.
to bring that up.
Yeah,
Like, look, if someone believes that one of the biggest problems on Earth is that there are too many people,
which he believes.
and that yes, and that it would be better if there were several billion fewer people, then I'm going to be skeptical about the big ideas that they're proposing if that's their sort of something that's driving their philosophy.
And why the hell does he own more? The two biggest owners of land in the United States are the CCP and Bill Gates. Like,
I
why?
did not know
Why?
that.
What are the CCP is buying up farmland like crazy, and then Bill Gates is the single largest individual landowner in the United States. It's like why? This sounds so conspiratorial, but he deeply believes that we're overpopulated, and he's buying up farmland. When he's asked about it, he said, "Oh, that's just part of my investment portfolio." He just casually became the largest landowner in the United States and is pushing kind of franken food and lab grown food onto the rest of the world and saying that it's basically an imperative that the United States shifts more to kind of fake food. I still haven't fully understood what's going on there, but yeah. So going back to your question, I think my like psychoanalysis of why I think we're at a period right now where there's more, I think, potential and abundance than ever, but also more anxiety. The US public and I think around the world, there's like this depression and anxiety epidemic. I think it's because we can both have an incredible future or destroy ourselves. So I think the health collapse. I think if we didn't have Bobby Kennedy talking about this, um, talking about a full reset and how we're incentivizing our food and how we're practicing medicine and going from disease management, which is a disaster, which profits from people being sick, to a disease reversal and prevention. It's so simple, but like we do not incentivize reversing or preventing disease. We spend 40 times more on managing cancer than preventing cancer. Cancer is a preventable condition, right? There's so many cancers that are as tied to food as smoking is to lung cancer, right? When we figured out that link, it was there's just as clear links to what we're eating and the pesticides and how we're treating our microbiome to pancreatic cancer, which my mom died of, which wasn't really a thing 50 years ago. So there's a big opportunity there. And obviously AI, where there's great opportunity, but people feel like it could be a threat. So we're working through that. And then I think, I personally going into the election was concerned about geopolitical issues. I mean, I think a weak America is really bad, and I think nuclear war is always a concern. So I think we have more existential threats than we ever have, but more opportunity, which are actually the same, the same coin, different sides. So I think we've got a lot of cool things to sort out and big things to sort out, and thank God we have free speech.
Yeah. Last big question on this, Kelly, and this is from a bit of a different angle. Um, and I ask myself this often as someone who's just a health advocate and tries to encourage people to train and work out and all of that. But is there a way to, at scale, encourage and promote personal responsibility and healthy lifestyles? Because we both agree that there is stuff going on in, let's call it the system, that is corrupt and certainly can be changed and improved. But when it comes down to individuals and families making good decisions in terms of their nutrition, in terms of their exercise, in terms of just living a healthy lifestyle, is there any way to promote that at scale using the apparatus that and opportunities that are now in place?
Absolutely. I mean, that starts with culture. Body positivity was an awful idea. In Japan, if you're an obese kid, it's like terrible. It's like an emergency at the school. You're like, I don't think full shaming them is good, but it's like it is unacceptable. Like the parents are like completely like ostracized and like, it's like what the hell is going on? Like it is not acceptable to have obese children in Japan. And, I always go to like the medical system knows how to make a point. When they thought we should shut down the country immediately in like one day, like they said we need to
Mhm.
do that, and we did it.
Right.
There's no ambiguity about, from the medical system about jabbing 72 shots in your child's arm and not asking a damn question about it. Like the
Mhm.
medical system knows how to say something. So why isn't there that same emphasis on the fact that kids should not be diabetic and fat? Like it's just like we just can't have that. So there's actually a culture set by the medical system to now doctors are being shamed on TikTok for weighing patients and they don't even weigh patients anymore. So literally there's like the doctors don't weigh patients anymore, kids,
It's
because
crazy.
they're worried
It's
about having a
crazy.
TikTok video about fat shaming the kid. Like it's a completely corporate capture. Body positivity is an idea created by the food industry. You had this Washington Post report last year where all these nutritionists were being paid covertly by the food companies, to say healthy at any size. And they paid the LA Unified School District to post this video to say that the only bad food is moldy food, and donuts are fine for kids, and it's actually terrible to fat shame, and it's actually racist because black folks and
Oh,
other
that's a
minority groups
crazy
are
that
they make this argument that
I know,
because
I've
certain
heard it.
minority
It's
groups
just
are more
crazy.
overweight, it's racist to talk. It's like it is crazy. It's crazy. We need a medical system that puts a mantle in the ground. We do not want fat diabetic kids in the United States. So actually, I think the emphasis of the medical system and just that type of mindset is really important. I do think the cultural moments around the presidential fitness and encouraging fitness and encouraging like Pete Hegseth, even his first day he's doing weightlifting with the Navy SEALs. It's like we need more of that in America. So I do think there's a big cultural moment. Then on the incentive front, we are a free country. Like we should have cigarettes, we should have beer, we should have Twinkies, 100%. We should have transparency in that. And then it's the incentives of the $4.5 trillion of healthcare. I always go to that. That $4.5 trillion of healthcare should be going towards incentivizing the right things. So there's a way, my company, if you have a doctor's note for healthy eating or exercise, if you have like prediabetes, we through telehealth write a doctor's note saying you should exercise because this is a clinically efficacious way to prevent and reverse prediabetes. With that, you can actually use tax-free dollars called HSA accounts in the United States. Like that is dramatically changed. We get letters every day, literally from patients being like, I didn't even know exercise is that important. And the fact that I can now get tax-free gym membership, I've transformed my life. People read our book. I thought it was so kind of dumb to have these shopping lists in the book. I'm like, oh, this is a serious book. We're not going to have like little line items on like what to buy at the market or like how to exercise. It's like people are clamoring for information. I've gotten thousands of emails from people being like, thank you. I just consult this list of what to buy all the time. Like people just don't have the information. They don't have the incentives. So I think if there was a more of a cultural emphasis from the medical system on chronic disease and then better incentives, I think we would have a dramatically transformed country.
Absolutely, man. Well, Callie, I love what you're doing on this front. I love your passion and just sharing your wisdom and knowledge and not sitting on the sidelines, but seeing what's wrong and getting involved. To me, that is the actual definition of patriotism. That's what it's supposed to be. I don't think that's how it strikes in most people's brains. They kind of just think of the flag and the stars and the stripes, but actually using your knowledge, using your platform, and using your energy to try to shift your nation and its people in a better direction. I think that's awesome. So shout out to you and your sister and the whole team. And I really hope that Maha isn't just a cool phrase or slogan. um, I genuinely hope that America will become healthy again. And I'm really actually quite excited. I generally don't get excited about political things, but I'm excited to see what happens on that front. And I really hope that they're able to reverse some of these disturbing trends and statistics and really start to get things back on track.
Thank you, sir. I mean, it's great to. I feel like we're all this loose coalition talking about this. I mean, it was early on, honestly, like 2 or 3 years ago, seeing you talk about just exercise and your journey. I mean, I feel like there's a beautiful loose coalition on X, on independent media, that's highlighted these issues that I think are spiritual at its core. And I'm really optimistic. I think everyone wants this, and what a positive development if the U.S. can lead the way on getting healthier. I mean, it's the core element of society. So appreciate you, man, and grateful for all you do.
Awesome, man. Is there anywhere you want people to follow you or something you want them to check out?
Yeah, I mean, X and Instagram at Calley Means, and my company's TrueMed.com. In the US, we, as I said, help people steer their medical dollars to non-pharmaceutical interventions that are effective. And then our book, Good Energy, with my sister Casey.
Awesome. Kelly Means. Thanks for coming on Real Talk with Zuby.
Thanks, man.